when I was thinking about what to say, I thought, well, it's going to be almost 5 o'clock. So say it short. And I was also thinking that I would share with you that I've spent the last 2 years, among other things, co-chairing a National Academy, U.S. National Academy study on AI in the workforce. And so this has biased very much my thinking about this subject. And I'll put in a little plug. The report is now written, but in the usual ponderous ways of the U.S. National Academy, it has now been put through the ringer of external reviews. And those reviews have come back. And now the committee is working madly to respond to those reviews. And the report should be out in about a month. So I urge you to kind of, we'll make sure you know about it when it does come out. I'll get all your names and email that. But, and of course, I'm not allowed to say anything that's in the report. I would never do such a thing. But I will just tell you what Tom thinks and take it from there. So AI in the workforce. The final thing I thought was, well, it would be good for a talk that comes at the end of the day to really reflect on some of the fundamental questions that this group of people is really interested in. And so here are 4 questions that I think are pretty important to figure out the impact of AI in the workplace. Where is AI technology really headed? When will it impact productivity in the workforce? Probably that should be when and where. Which work will be replaced versus augmented? When I talk with people in D.C., by the way, legislators, this is maybe the #1 question they're interested in. And of course, what should governments do about all this? Now, spoiler alert, I do not have the answer to all these questions, but I thought they'd be good ones to raise and discuss, and then in the discussion period in the reception afterward, we can find out from everybody what we think the answers are. Okay, so let's start with AI technology. I looked up today what was the birthday of ChatGPT? When was it released? And ChatGPT told me it was November 30th, 2022. So it has been less, today it's May 22, it has been less than a year and a half since ChatGPT was introduced. It's amazing to think the impact it's had, but also the technical developments that have come just in that less than 18 months. So when it came out, remember the news articles that reviewed it highlighted things like it hallucinates, it can't be trusted, many things like this. And so when I look over the last year and a half, some of the trends, some of the technical trends that I think have reshaped what GPT and related systems are, and some of the trends that are going to continue to shift the technology. Here are some of the trends I come up with. One of the really important ones that we're all familiar with now is the trend of bringing other software, traditional software, into use by letting GPT call it, so plugins. And at this point, I'll use ChatGPT as an example, but if you work for Google, fill in Gemini. If you work for Meta, fill in Llama or your favorite model. But at this point, for example, ChatGPT has no problem at all multiplying very large numbers because it doesn't. It calls a calculator, and it doesn't make mistakes. There are many kinds of tasks that it can now do. Google's Gemini, I'm pretty sure, is hooked into Google Maps. And so there are many software functions that technologists have worked for decades to develop these kinds of traditional software And now they're within the purview, they can be accessed by GPT and friends. That's an important trend. There are a lot of these plugins. Trend number 2 is kind of the flip of that. So if trend 1 is LLMs got much more capable because they can call traditional software. Trend 2 is there are now programming frameworks around that allow you, that support you, a software developer, to build software systems that use LLMs as subroutines. So systems like LangChain, for example, makes it easy for you to build actually a society, a collection of LLMs which are specialists. You can instruct one to be a geologist and one to be an architect and so forth, and assemble them as you like. And this is leading to a new style of software development that I think is underappreciated. I think, so Tom's prediction, it's 5 o'clock, we can do this. Tom's prediction is when we look back 5 years from now and we say, well, where did the big advances in AI come from? I think we'll end up saying it was true that building bigger and better $10 billion trainable models instead of $100 million GPTs did lead to smarter individual intelligences. But I think we'll say 5 years from now, the big surprise was that we got even more leverage by building societies of intelligent agents that interact with each other with different kind of specialized roles. I have 2 reasons for believing that, 2 arguments. One is, I think Harari was right when he wrote the book Sapiens. If you haven't read the book, the one-word summary of Sapiens, if you haven't read it, you should. But the one-word summary of that book is, the reason humans are doing so well compared to 20,000 years ago is not because we're really any smarter. Evolution hasn't had time to really make our brains a whole lot smarter. It's because we now work in groups that are orders of magnitude bigger and better organized than the family unit groups that were the only thing that existed 20,000 years ago. I think he was right about that. So that's one of my arguments. And so I think artificial intelligence hasn't discovered that yet, but maybe will. The second half of my argument is there will be 2 orders of magnitude more researchers looking at this problem than there will be looking at how to build bigger, better models. Why? Because all of us people at universities can't build bigger, better models. And the natural thing for university researchers to look at is what to do with these smaller models that we can use, that we can afford to compute. And so there will be 2 orders of magnitude more researchers, all the graduate students, all the university-based people who are going to be looking into novel, innovative ways of building societies of intelligences. So I could be wrong, but this looks to me like a really important trend and something to think about as we're contemplating where we might get technically. Trend 3, personal large language models. Ethan did a great job pointing this out in his talk earlier today. We're just months away from models that will be on our iPhones and on our Google Pixel phones. And this is going to be a pretty interesting shift. And again, in November 2022, when ChatGPT came out, there was no notion that it would become a personal device. We all chatted with the same device. fourth trend I already alluded to is just this open source smaller model, development of smaller models that are open source as an alternative path to the very large models that can't possibly be open source because they're so big. And this is another trend that, again, we didn't even know about in November 2022. So those are some of the thoughts about where AI technology has been moving, and if we extrapolate those trends, there are other things too, but multimodal models are actually very important. So as Google pointed out, Gemini has been trained from the bottom up, in their words, on not just text, but text plus voice plus video plus images. And one of the implications of that is that maybe that area of AI that has made only modest progress recently, robotics. You know, really the advances in AI in the past 5 years have mostly been natural language and reasoning knowledge work kind of AI. But the physical work, robotics AI, has just been making slow, steady, non-exponential progress. But one possibility, if we think about the next 5 years, is that these multimodal models, which now are capturing physical common sense, analogous to the kind of natural language common sense that ChatGPT was able to capture, they're capturing common sense about what's a stable structure. If you want to stack these items up, how would you do it? And that's the kind of physical common sense that has held back robotics for many decades. So one possibility is that multimodal models will catalyze similar exponential explosion for robotics. And if that happens, then again, it reshifts the whole picture of how the workforce is impacted. All right, so that's question number one. As I pointed out, I don't know the answers, but I know some of the questions. Another question that is really important is how soon and where will AI impact productivity in the workforce? And one thing that I think is good to consider is that there are several different gating factors, that's probably the right word, that determine the answer to that question. So one, of course, is technical progress, which has been pretty rapid recently. But complementary changes to business processes is something that traditionally happens much slower. There's a lot more inertia there, a lot more maybe creativity, a very different kind of creativity is required. And again, I think Ethan's talk this morning did a great job of just kind of showing us, getting us thinking about how even the definition of which bundle of tasks form a job is likely to change. And if you're running a business, you have to figure out what to do about that. That's a very different process. Then, of course, there are government regulations. We're in the midst of all that. And there's social acceptance. I'll make another prediction, which I've made. I'll make another prediction, which is there are people who are not going to put up with, there are people who are going to resist the idea of robots, physical robots in our midst. And I think the canary in the coal mine event happened earlier this year when people burned up a Waymo robot So there was a Waymo car in San Francisco. Many of you are familiar with this story, I can tell from the giggles. But it was empty. It was resting on the curb, and a gang of people came up and lit it on fire. They killed the robot. Now everybody, thought, well, this is an isolated event. I talked with some of my robotics friends. They assured me it was an isolated event, nothing to worry about here. But I think it's actually, there's a reason that event happened. And it was a kind of statement by a group of people about what they thought about the idea of putting self-driving cars out alone on the streets. And I think we need to take that kind of social acceptance idea somewhat seriously when we think about where will physical robots fit in our society, especially given that we're hell-bent correctly on making sure they cannot harm a person. So they'll be rather defenseless as a result. And what does that mean? Maybe it means we'll have a lot of robots in our apartment or in our house helping us. They'll be protected there just like our pets are. But we wouldn't want them roaming around alone on the street because it's not so safe. So just something to think about. But anyway, so of course adoption of AI depends on all these things. But one of the things that some of my friends pointed out to me recently is that, sorry, I got ahead of my slides. So if we look at who is being impacted, some of the talks we heard today were pointing out that groups like software developers, customer service agents, paralegals. It's interesting to notice that these are basically single task knowledge work. And so these are tasks where already there were jobs where individual people did this. And now we could augment or replace with AI some of the pretty much single tasks for these. And that lets us skip this complementary business model change issue. We don't have to reorganize work. It was already organized this way. So it's kind of interesting to look at the nature of the tasks that we are already seeing AI having an impact. Okay, so will this then lead to higher unemployment? Well, my economist friends, some of you are in this room, have pointed out to me that just because we increase productivity doesn't mean employment will go up or down. It depends, for example, on whether it leads to fewer work hours and an unchanged demand for goods. Then we'll have need for less employment. Or whether this change leads to lower prices and higher quality and a resulting increase in demand. And so, for example, when airplanes, propeller-driven, were largely replaced by jet engines, the productivity of pilots increased rapidly, right? Dramatically. If you measure productivity of pilots in terms of passenger hours that they could carry in an airplane, faster, they could fly long distance. But despite that increase in productivity of jet pilots, I mean, I have many more jet pilots because the consequence was an increase in demand for jet flights because the quality and the prices for air flights suddenly were much better. So it's a complex story to try to predict these things. Another wild card in here is the question, will demographic changes actually dominate the unemployment picture? This is a plot of the number of births per woman on Earth estimated by the United Nations, from 1950 up till 2023. And as you can see, we've gone from 4.8 to, in the US, 1.6. The number you need to replace the population is pretty much agreed to be 2.2. So we're now giving birth to fewer children in the United States than we need to maintain the population. Immigration is also a factor in terms of total U.S. population. But if it weren't for immigration, we'd be losing people. We'd be in a decreasing population. In fact, projections are that by 2061, the population of Earth will peak at about 9 billion, and then it'll start decreasing. And this is not just happening in the US. Here are fertility rates, births per woman, in different countries from 1980 up till present day, in US, Mexico, India, China. So around the world, and especially in Western developed countries, we have this thing going on where fewer young people are being born, older people are living longer. The ratio of, say, retired people to wage earners is shifting. And if we don't find a way to improve productivity, we might be in deep trouble in terms of just supporting the economy. So if you look at it from this perspective, you realize we might need a productivity improvement just to cancel out the negative effects of demographic shifts. And now we have a Goldilocks question. Will AI improve productivity not enough, or too much, or just right to compensate for the demographic shifts? And will those demographic shifts themselves shift again? For example, if AI makes the economy much nicer, then will people want to have more children? Don't know, but this is another wild card to think about in considering these questions. Okay, so which work will be replaced versus augmented is another important question. And here I think the actual question is who's going to decide the answer? And it seems to me we all are in some sense. There will be, for example, employers, in many cases, will choose whether to replace or augment workers. A good example is customer service. I was asking ChatGPT for a good example. Customer service, there's a trade-off. We could replace people. It'll reduce costs, improve consistency, or we could augment them and make our customers actually happier because there would still be a human to fall back on. But it won't be just employers who have a voice. Employees actually are probably in the best position to know how to leverage AI. The state of here in Pennsylvania, one of the first states to run this experiment, the Governor Shapiro has, his administration has gotten a number of licenses from OpenAI to put behind the Pennsylvania state firewall, and then held a competition where he invited the workers and the government to write a proposal for why they should get one of these licenses. They did. He picked 100. His committee picked 100. And now they've given them out to these workers who can use them for whatever they want. So it's a very bottom-up process of allowing the workers to discover and invent the new version of their job based on this technology. This I'm very proud of our state for having come up with this idea. I've been to Harrisburg and discussed this with the administration there, and I think it's a pretty interesting experiment. So sometimes there'll be employers, sometimes employees. It'll also be designers. You can build cars without steering wheels if you wish, and there are groups who are planning to do that. Or you can have self-driving software in your Tesla and retain a steering wheel. The design of the technology actually has a big influence on augmentation versus replacement. But in the end, in many cases, it'll also be us customers. So people ask, will doctors be replaced? I'm pretty sure the answer is not anytime soon. And it's not because doctors can't be, their decisions can't be improved. They can be improved. But I'd rather go to a human doctor who's using AI than to an AI itself. And so, and I'm the paying customer in the end. So if somebody opens a business offering computer doctors, I predict not many customers. So it's a complex question about which of these jobs will be automated versus augmented. We have to realize that we all have, many contingencies have a voice in this. Okay, I'm going to have to end here. So let me just stop here by saying a few things that I think government should do. Obviously, there's going to be disruption in the workforce, and so government should be increasing the availability of training programs. They should be making new efforts to inform workers about the state of affairs. What is actually the changing supply and demand of skills in different regions of the country? What are the directions those supply and demand are moving? OECD, by the way, has a pretty nice prototype version of that. Can be improved upon. To make that succeed, we're going to need much, much better data than we have today to track what's really going on in the economy. The worst solution I've heard proposed is we'll have the government collect even more data than the Bureau of Labor Statistics currently collects. The best solution I've heard is we have that data, it's hiding in plain sight. It's in private enterprise. It's in companies like Indeed.com, which has real-time data about a lot of jobs. In LinkedIn.com, which has real-time data about a lot of resumes and skills supply and demand. And in companies like ADP, which pays most of our paychecks and knows what salaries are affiliated with which position, and therefore the market value of those skills, supply and demand. So if we even use just the data from those three companies, we would have a tremendously more effective real-time picture, observability into supply and demand of skills. And that, I think, is the only way we're going to get to something that will give our workers what they deserve. All right, now I want to stop here because I mostly want to use our time for discussion and questions. Thank you.
So the quick question about for the workplace, the adoption of AI. So what would be a prediction? So early on with the AI, we lay off many employees at the call center, customer service, and then the AI can take managerial work, so lay off some kind of supervisor to save costs. So in the future, we'll be lay off some CEOs maybe because the AI could be sitting in the boardroom to help the board members check the CEO is doing good or bad. We don't need that guy.
I see where you're going with this. It seems to me there will be jobs where we're just going to choose not, until the technology totally dominates, there are going to be jobs where we just do not want to get rid of the workers. We want them to be better workers, more productive, and higher quality results, higher quality decisions. The CEO is a perfect example, right? And in fact, one way to think about this whole technology is that it will make each of us like a CEO in the following sense. CEOs they have a lot of resources at their disposal. And therefore, if they have an important decision to make, they can afford to have consultants who are specialists in different areas to give them the information they need to make the right decision. We're approaching a period now where we can go to even ChatGPT and get a lot of specialized knowledge if we know which question to ask. And a CEO needs to know what question to ask. But in a sense, it's making each of us a CEO because now we have pretty much for free access to the same kind of team of consultants that a CEO would. But I mean, maybe at some point AI will become so great that there will be nothing that people can do. I think that's a ways off, but I think what's going to happen in the intermediate term is we'll make decisions. Toll booth operators, no, we're going to automate that one. But doctors, we're going to keep humans. We're going to give them consultants. We'll have to do that for every different task.
So thank you for a great talk. So I wanted to follow up on the adding these sort of plugins that allow it to call real code and do real things. If we think about the history of the last 10 years, it's been about these ever bigger models being needed to get more performance and more capabilities. And I'm wondering how you see these plugins contributing to that. So I could imagine it being like, oh, suddenly you can call much more efficient things, and that means you don't have to scale up the models as much. That seems like that could be very good for adding capabilities. But I could also imagine a version of this where once you're calling some sort of specific thing, you lose a lot of that interactions that the networks usually allow. And so now it becomes you kind of can't scale it in the same way. And so I'm curious which way you think it's going to go.
Great question. One way to think about it is that today's LLMs are kind of like System 1 thinking, and Kahneman System 1, System 2, right? System 1 thinking, in roughly speaking, is the thinking you do, the decisions you make in a second or less. System 2 is like when you play chess and you think, well, if I do this, and then they do this, and I do this, and they do that. That's System 2 thinking. LLMs are pretty good at System 1 thinking. It turns out they're terrible at playing chess. But if you had a plug-in, the reason they're terrible at playing chess is they don't really have the ability to do any kind of long-term search ahead and remember the state of affairs and do the pruning and so forth. So plugins are a great way to surgically insert capabilities that would otherwise not be achievable with System 1. That's what it looks like to me. That's the way I parse what I'm seeing. Now, there's going to be a lot of research on advancing LLMs with new architectures and so forth. Already a lot of work on adding memory, retrieval augmented generation, where you can store records of what happened with earlier experiences, retrieve those on demand for new problems you have to solve. So maybe we'll see architectures that do that. But at least in the near term, if you think of LLMs as System 1, then plugins are just a great way to insert route planning, System 2, chess playing, System 2, all kinds of optimization problems that require a fair amount of computation and memory and search.
So I'll be the last to defend the rate at which we're gathering firm-level data in government data sets. But your comment about building on the private data that we have is building on what we know about skills, supply, and demand at the individual level, when many insights from labor economics show that the impact on workers is very much mediated by what happens at firms. Firms are deciding the organizational design and the process innovation, and the difference between their productivity impacts what they pay. So could there be maybe a bit of a problem with saying we've got all this individual skilled supply and demand information, but we're not seeing what's going on at the firms. Where does that leave us as this speeds up?
I think I'm with you on that. So I would still say this data is unmatched by anything the government is ever going to have. But it's not enough. You're saying we need more, right? We need also data about what's going on inside the firms. And so things like the sort of recently redesigned business census, which is a government business census, is a step in a great direction. I don't see a simple way to get that kind of information across all businesses except to do that kind of census. I think we're in a kind of easier position when it comes to individual skilled supply demand data because, you know, the way things work, these three companies have a lot of that data already. But to get the business census, you kind of have to talk to all the businesses. But it is really interesting. I mean, another thing that a lot of people bring up in these discussions is, oh, what about China? How are we going to compete with China? Think about data acquisition in China. Chinese people are pretty smart, and the Chinese government is pretty smart, and they're going to, at some point, also notice that if they collect this data, it will be very useful to them. And they have an organizational structure that makes it easy to collect that data. We don't currently. In fact, it's very difficult to convince anybody in D.C. that this is anything but a joke. I'm not joking, but when I bring it up in D.C., they think I'm like teasing them or something. But I think this is where the data really lies. Anyway, it's interesting to think about the Chinese structure and what it would take for them to get this data for their country and what it would take for us to do it.
We have time for a couple more questions. There's a couple over here, and maybe we'll get one more from there. So.
Thanks for the presentation, Tom. I was wondering, you did not call out the legal implications of this, like, especially in the short term, or short and intermediate term. A lot of consulting companies are exactly worried about that, before using any of these, especially in the system one thinking.
Worried about
legal. Yeah.
Oh, legal. I did not call that out because it would have taken the whole time. Yeah, but clearly there are going to be some really interesting Supreme Court cases coming up. And that's when it won't get resolved any other way, in my opinion.
Okay, someone over there. Yeah, you.
You talked about kind of augmentation versus substitution, but I think there's also lots of potential for gains on like the expensive margin, and I'm wondering if that's the right way to think about, for example, the doctors you gave of if we're not going to see it replacing the doctor when I go to the appointment, what about when I have a fever or my kid has a fever at 4 a.m. and there's no doctor available, or other countries? I think it's where they don't have the doctor to patient.
That's
population.
A great point. Yeah, if you didn't hear it, the point was another dimension of this augment versus automate is availability. I guess that's what you're pointing at, right? So right now I can go to a human doctor anytime I want as long as I wait 2.5 months to get on their schedule. And I go between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. But if my kid's sick at 3 a.m. tonight, I might decide I'd go with a computer doctor over none. And that access is so important. We're already seeing that to some degree in online education services in very rural, poor areas where the online education has made some inroads that it has not made in wealthier regions.
All right. Okay. One more question. Okay. I have
I'm just surprised at your list of what should government do. I think it's quite thin. I would say if I see, for example, in Europe that they have EU AI Act where they really are monitoring how the models are used, that they don't allow the models to use some features like facial recognition. Why is this approach a little bit more laissez-faire and just take into consideration the worker and give all the responsibility to them?
Good. Well, so if you didn't hear the question over there, it's why doesn't my list of what government should do include social issues like privacy, face recognition, those kind of things? I don't have a good answer for that. I will tell you that the high order bit for me is we could try to predict all the things that could go wrong and then try to regulate to not let that ever happen. Or we can go forward, things will get screwed up, and then we can try to fix them. And there's a whole range. Those are kind of two ends of the spectrum, right? I think right now it is just so hard to predict that if we really want to be conservative, we'll just handcuff ourselves. And I'd rather go forward, and what I would add here is, and I have in other forums, is that in the US here, we need systems that monitor what's going on so that, for example, if there are deep fake videos that are out in social media, so that we can detect them and advertise that and make sure people realize. So there's predicting and preventing, there's monitoring in real time and trying to fix it as you go, and there are more extreme positions. I'm kind of on this monitoring in real time to oversimplify, but that's a longer discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much.